With Total War Warhammer 3 somewhat around the corner, I want to finally get into the respective lores of the various Chaos Pantheon. We talked about this in our Chaos Pantheon videos. We went into the respective lores of each and every one of these gods. The lore of Tzeentch, the lore of Slaanesh, and the lore of Nurgle. There is, of course, not one for Khorne because he does not like magic. So the very first one we're going to go into here is the lore of Tzeentch. This was brought to my attention by the Ant19. He was saying like, hey, did you actually ever do those videos? And I didn't. So thank you, the Ant, and this is a reminder to myself to do those videos. So, starting in with the lore of Tzeentch, we'll talk a little bit about the 8th edition background of this lore. And I'll be totally honest with you, the lore of Tzeentch, which is supposed to be like, you know, the pinnacle spellcaster, right? You think of Tzeentch, you think of someone who is the master of knowledge and of wisdom, the changer of ways, all these kind of cool special things. But truth be told, in the 8th edition, it really wasn't that way. The 8th edition Warhammer Warriors of Chaos book has a lore of Tzeentch, and it's really, in all honesty, not a really good lore. It's actually quite shitty. The lore of Nurgle and the lore of Slaanesh are better, way better. The lore of Tzeentch is a little too direct damage focused and not focused enough on actually doing much for the army itself, which is fine because there's some lores that kind of get away with that. When you look at stuff like the lore of high magic, it's got a lot of benefits to the army, and especially in its lore attribute. When you look at the lore of dark magic, though, it's not as kit friendly, I guess you could say. I mean, it can't go a bunch of different ways. But there are a lot of different things that have happened to the lore of Tzeentch over the years. I mean, it used to be just a bunch of different fire. In 6th edition, the spells were red fire, orange fire, yellow fire, green fire, blue fire, indigo fire, and violet fire. That was names of every single one of those spells. It was a kind of a longer name like red fire of alteration, orange fire of transition, or yellow fire of transformation, green fire of mutation, blue fire of metamorphosis, indigo fire of change, and violet fire of Tzeentch. And they have very similar qualities to now, but they are a little bit different. But the 8th edition lore and the way that the lore of magic works in 8th edition is a little bit more fleshed out, I guess I want to say. It plays to the way the 8th edition plays a little bit more than 6th edition did. But a lot of people argue that the 6th edition lore of Tzeentch was very powerful by comparison. So today, let's go into that 8th edition lore of Tzeentch and its lore attribute and how that might be translated into a Total War Warhammer atmosphere. We've seen a lot of these lores kind of make transitions into the game in different ways than they actually are on the tabletop, and that's fine. They do have to make a transition because you don't have stuff like strength tests or toughness tests in the Total War Warhammer universe, but you do have them in the tabletop universe. So the lore of Tzeentch's first initial thing here is the lore attribute, Boon of Magic. Tzeentch is the master of magic, and he rewards sorcerers who breathe deep of the winds of magic with a boon of sorcerer's power. And essentially the way this works in tabletop, that anytime you roll a 6 on your power die, you get additional power die. Now that's kind of cool and all, but it's not going to be too advantageous to a game like Total War Warhammer. So very simple mechanic here is when you look at stuff like Life Bloom, or you look at the lore of Nehekhara and how that heals every time you use a spell. Well, what about the Boon of Magic? If every time you use a spell from the lore of Tzeentch, you actually are gifted Winds of Magic, either a percentage or just a static kind of recharge. So you kind of almost always have like a passive arcane conduit as long as you're constantly casting spells. And I think that plays really well and really awesomely into this overarching lore of Tzeentch, right? This master spellcaster, this kind of master of wisdom and of the winds of magic as a whole. And I think that plays very, very well into what you would expect from a lore of Tzeentch. So I think that's a really good starting place. But the first spell, the signature spell, and the way that this worked in tabletop is every single character who chose the lore of his respective magic then had the lore attribute that was a passive ability that was always present in the lore. And then you had a signature spell, which you were always granted guaranteed. The other ones you had to roll on based off of your level as a spellcaster. If your level either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Typically not that. You weren't either 2 or 4. You know, the scale was usually on a 2-level basis. You rolled a die, and you rolled as many die as you had levels of spells, and that's how many spells you had. So, you know, the spells are numbered 1 through 6, and you roll 4 die. If you roll any duplicates, you can re-roll them. So basically, if you have a level 4 wizard, you can have 4 of the 6 spells available to you. More than likely, you'll get double, so you can pick and choose there on. But let's go into the first spell here, Blue Fire of Tzeentch. As the wizard twists his hands in the air, the bodies of his enemies are consumed with coruscating blue flames. And this is a really simple ability. It's just like every other magic missile we see in the game, is that it just simply shoots the enemy with a blue fire of Tzeentch. Now, this also affixes them, or affixes the target with Warp Flame. Now, Warp Flame is a new mechanic we're going to have to get with the lore of Tzeentch, or with any of the Chaos Demons that we'll hopefully be getting in the 3rd game, unless they come in the 2nd game, as hinted at the end of the 2nd game, but who the fuck knows anymore. But Warp Flame, the way it worked in Total War, or the way it worked in Tabletop, was that if you were affixed with Warp Flame, you would take additional damage based off of a toughness test. If you failed the test, you took D3 wounds. If you passed the test, the unit gained regeneration. And it kind of just shows you, it's supposed to create the fickleness of chaos, and how it's not always supposed to be how you, the caster, want it to be. It's going to be however chaos wants it to be. And that kind of plays into that really cool mechanic there. So I don't think that, we haven't seen the randomness of the tabletop really come into Total War Warhammer. It's not present in the Skaven. It's not very present in the spellcasting mechanic of the game. It's not present in anything in the Chaos roster. So with the new Demons of Chaos, or any update to that roster, will we get the randomness of Chaos infused into their rule set? It's hard to say. My initial thought is that Warp Flame will be like a flaming attack, only it'll do not increased damage, but it'll do additional damage to kind of like an AP type scenario. So you look at stuff that does flaming attacks, it of course does more damage to lightly armored things. Well, I look at Warp Flame as having like an AP characteristic attached to its like persistent damage, or adding a persistent damage attribute to Warp Flame, because it's supposed to be like this, basically like demonic napalm is kind of the way it's described in the lore. And that's what I would really like to see, is Warp Flame having an AP damage profile attached to it, essentially. And I think that'd be a really great way to distinguish this from simply the lore of fire. As we go through this lore, you're really going to see parallels to the lore of fire and the lore of dark magic pretty heavily as we talk about things. So let's move on to our next one here. Treason of Tzeentch. When I was growing up, I used to think it was Tzeentch, and I was just a stupid ass. So Treason of Tzeentch. The wizard reaches his thought into the minds of his victims, tormenting them with subtle whispers that stoke the fires of mistrust and treachery. This is a real easy ability. It's essentially a hex, and it requires that the unit use the lowest leadership available to them. Now, that's of course not going to be the case in Total War Warhammer. I could see this as kind of something from the lore of Dark, with the aspect of the Dread Knight, or I'm sorry, not aspect of Dread Knight, the one that causes leadership issues. Aspect of the Dread Knight is the one that creates terror. But something like that, where it just simply causes leadership issues. There's not really a lot of other benefits from this. In the tabletop, I made it so that you can't get benefits from Inspiring Presence or Hold Your Ground. And that'd be kind of interesting, is if this ability negated the use of any kind of Lord's aura or leadership aura created by character aura size. That'd be interesting if this could somehow negate that. But I do think that the penalty to leadership just kind of all stacks up, right? Like, the character aura adds a bonus to leadership, but it's not like it is in tabletop, where if you're in a certain radius of a character, you use their leadership. In Total War Warhammer, you have a static value with bonuses and penalties affixed to it. So I would see that this is just simply a penalty to leadership overall. Overcasting it. And here's something I would like to see more with overcasting, and I want to talk about this pretty heavily with this lore, but I want the overcast on this to increase the size. Or I like how what they've done for some things, where the overcast on it has made the spell itself not lock to a unit. You can cast it statically wherever you want on the playfield. That's kind of cool. But I'd like the Treason of Tzeentch, rather than it to be, hey, here's just our simple circle, you can overcast it to make it a larger circle. And that might make it a little bit more advantageous, or at least different, or at least more demonic, something that changes and breaks the mold of the typical kind of fare of the standard kind of penalty to leadership ability. Let's move on here to our next one, Pink Fire of Tzeentch. A roiling tide of iridescent energy flows from the caster's hand, enveloping his foes in a cone of magical flame. Real simple ability here. Just your typical kind of conical attack that we see with stuff like Plague Breath, any of those types of things like Wind Blast. Very simple scenario here. I would want this to just kind of be a fire ability that just shoots in a cone, does Warp Flame damage, so maybe a little bit heavier on the AP spectrum here, and it just does that typical kind of blast of damage here. I don't think this one needs to be overly, reverse engineered and made crazy for the fact that it is chaos. I think just giving it a really cool animation that is the purple, black, white of like what I would imagine Warp Flame to look like, and having it do some sort of cool AP damage. I want this to be kind of an AP heavy fighting magic. Typically, if you were using the lore of metal, you knew you were going to go up against Bretonnia or the Warriors of Chaos in tabletop. That was like your big AP lores of magic, and I want this to kind of have some of that, since there's so many units in Total War Warhammer that do require AP to really crack, and so many armies too that do require that as well. You really can't go wrong with AP in that game like you could in tabletop, and you could completely lose the effectiveness of lore magic if you didn't have a bunch of things that wouldn't have their armor be used against them. So I want lore of Tzeentch to be a little bit on that spectrum. Moving to our next one here, Bolt of Change. The wizard hurls a single devastating bolt of energy that blasts through the ranks of the enemy, racking their bodies with sickening and uncontrollable mutations. This one's really cool. It's a pretty standard one though at the same time, because basically it's going to be a straight shot. Think of it kind of just like we see with Soul Quench, or what we talked about with Blue Fire Tzeentch, a magic missile, right? But the trail of it would have an impact with it, and it wouldn't lose effectiveness. So you look at this as a ballista bolt in the way that it would travel through units and do damage. And it's supposed to be a pretty heavy AP damage, right? So this thing is supposed to do a lot of damage, cause Warp Flame, and armor saves are not permitted against wounds caused by the Bolt of Change. So what I'd love for this thing to do is something that you can just kind of shoot down range, and it'll pass through a whole unit, doing damage either in a whole line of models, or like maybe it is a moving, like to make this a weird parallel, like a moving block that travels through and does more than just one rank of units. It can do like multiple, like if you're thinking of a unit of, just say, spearmen that are in a line of 4 down and 15 across. Well, if you're looking at this, the Bolt of Change, does it just travel through one line of 4, or does it travel through 3 lines of 4 because it's like a moving block, like I'm trying to say? So I'd like to see that kind of mechanic there. We see something very similar with it with the spear spell from Lore of Beasts that I can't think of the whole entire name of, or Amber Spear. It was something very similar to that, but something I wanted to have a little bit more impact and to have it have a little bit more drive. I think Amber Spear, after it was fixed in a patch, it kind of fell to the wayside. It still has some uses here and there, but I want Bolt of Change to kind of be that kind of either a single target spell where you can snipe out a heavily armored lord, thus negating some of the bullshit mechanic of how a bolt thrower works, or it's meant to really do a lot of damage to, say, a block of Phoenix Guards that are heavily armored and ready to just take a punishing. I'd love to kind of see that kind of be there to threaten a unit like that. Almost like a Fate of Una is kind of used to target really high value targets that are units, not just single models. Moving on to our next one here, Glean Magic. The caster steals sorceries from his adversary's mind. This is a pretty interesting one. It effectively causes kind of like a mental duel between 2 wizards in the tabletop. You would both roll die, and whoever won would basically lose out, and you would steal a spell, stuff like that. Now, we have not seen a stealing spell mechanic, even though that's been present in previous lores. We've not seen anything that destroys magic items, even though that's present in previous lores. So I would want Glean Magic to be simplified. I wanted to borrow something from dark magic like Soul Stealer. So Glean Magic, rather than it allowing you to tank through damage like Soul Stealer does because it's drawing health from people, I want Glean Magic to actually draw from their Winds of Magic. I don't think that there's anything that really focuses on that as far as a spell goes in Total War Warhammer, and I think it would be so thematic for a demon and Tzeentch in and of itself to just kind of draw from the Winds of Magic and use it as basically, you can cast Glean Magic and you're sucking away the magic energy of the entire army, kind of like a Winds of Magic battery for you, like an arcane conduit, if you want to think of it that way. And I think in conjunction with the Boon of Magic lore attribute, this is going to keep your character going a lot. And honestly, the spells we've all talked about are casted on 5 up, 7 up, 8 up, 8 up, 8 up. So it's very easy to get these spells off. These are not really top tier spells that require a ton of power dice to roll in tabletop. They're very quick and easy to get access to. And it's kind of like I said, borrows from the lore of dark magic, where it has a lot of low value, kind of supporting, almost accessory type spells like Chill Wind, or the one that allows you to boost up your own Winds of Magic while damaging you. Glean Magic would kind of be like that mixed with Soul Stealer. And I think that'd be a really cool thematic way to get additional Winds of Magic into what is supposed to be a very casty heavy lore, or at least character. Our next one here is Tzeentch's Firestorm. A searing ball of scarlet flames swirls around the caster before being cast towards the enemy, engulfing regiments with balefire. Now, this one I've kind of gone back and forth in my head on, like how to really do this one. It seems pretty easy, right? It seems like a typical Vortex spell. You cast it, boom, it drops a big swirling purple, black, white vortex of death that does a lot of destruction. It moves around the map and kills things. That, I think, is the easy route. And I would want an overcast for that to actually increase the size of the vortex. You can do that in tabletop. You went from a small blast template to a large blast template by overcasting it. And we haven't seen any other Vortex spell do that just yet in Total War Warhammer, and I think it's time. I mean, Vortex spells are extremely unreliable because, you know, they have a chance of going completely into your own army, completely backwards and off of the line entirely. Having a larger template, a larger Vortex, has the ability to be a little bit more effective, because if it does go into your army, well, at least a portion of it's still in their army. If it does go off the battlefield, at least maybe a portion of it stayed on. Or if it goes in their army, it's going to wreak havoc. That, I think, would be really, really fucking sick. But another way you could do this, because this is going to play into how we're going to talk about the next spell, but another way you could do this is a not a breath attack, but a wind attack. You know, the long stripe, the long rectangle, and have it kind of look like a more like a flame wall than a firestorm, because our next ability is also a vortex, or at least the way I would look at it is as a vortex. So our next spell here is Infernal Gateway. The wizard opens a portal to the dread realm of chaos, a magical tear in the mortal plane that sucks those nearby to certain oblivion. Almost like Pit of Shades, right? So it sounds very similar. Now, Infernal Gateway, the way it works in tabletop, is very different than anything we could see in Total War Warhammer, that I know of at least. Essentially, you choose a target or a unit. The target suffers 2d6 strength, 2d6 hits. So, I mean, you could do something as high as 12 strength, 12 hits, and really wreck a unit, or, you know, 2 strength, 2 hits. It just depends. That's the nature of chaos in the game. Is supposed to be very random. But you roll for the strength first. If an 11 or 12 is rolled, when determining the spell's strength value, the hits are resolved at 10 strength, and that unit suffers 3d6 hits rather than 2d6 hits, so they can really suffer up to 18 wounds. But that's it. It's just a direct damage spell. It's not a vortex. But I think Infernal Gateway, the way it would be translated would be either like a souped up Fate of Buna, if they wanted to kind of keep it in this kind of direct damage ability that just does a high propensity of damage to one unit and causing warp flame and all that action and high AP values. You can do it like that. But if you look at the lore text behind that, wizard opens a portal to the dread realm of chaos, a magical tear in the mortal plane. I think of that as a stationary vortex, much like the Pit of Shades. Something that doesn't move, that is rending and tearing and destroying things, or called the Kraken, like we see in the Lore of the Depths. That's kind of something I would see for the Infernal Gateway. Imagine this huge, like, I guess I'm kind of looking at it from a Warcraft Infernal Gateway kind of standpoint, but again, this like gateway pops up, and it's like, you know, that big Infernal Gateway that we see in the Blasted Lands of Warcraft with the two guardians on left and right of it, and a swirling vortex is just arms and claws reaching out and grabbing people and pulling them in. Of course, Realms of Chaos aren't like that in Warhammer. They are in the poles, but not like all throughout the world. They're more like actual, like a vortex in the center of like just standing gravity. It's not supposed to make much sense. But I think that is cooler and more thematic and awesome than just simply like a Fate Abuna style damage spell that just kind of causes like a black haze around characters and they go, oh, I'm dying. And they all just pass out. I love the lore of Fate Abuna, but I just don't like the effect of how it actually translates into the game. It's kind of lackluster for how much damage it does. I want Infernal Gateway to be, holy shit, that was intense. Like, that's exactly what I would want. So that sums up our lore of Tzeentch here today. Hope you guys enjoyed this little video. It was a quick little blast on this lore. Let me know what you guys think about Tzeentch's Firestorm and the Infernal Gateway and how you would either have them translate into the game. There are some stuff from the 6th edition Warhammer Hordes of Chaos book that go into the lore of Tzeentch spells. A lot of them though, like Blue Fire itself. Okay, tell me this sounds familiar. This is a magic missile with range 12 inches, causing 2d6 hits with a strength of d6 plus 1. If I read... here's the Blue Fire of Tzeentch, is a range of 24 inches, causes d6 strength, d6 hits. So everything's very similar in that some things are slightly changed. The Red Fire, which is the actual Blue Fire of Tzeentch, is a signature spell from 8th edition. In 6th edition, it's called Red Fire, and it's got a range of 30 versus 24. So a lot of things are very similar. Some things are a little bit different. But for the most part, I think that the only thing I would pull from 6th edition and say it'd be really cool would be Indigo Fire, because it allows models that are hit by it, anyone that's killed, all models killed by the spell turn into a Horror of Tzeentch, which is really, really cool. We haven't seen anything like that in the game, and that'd be pretty cool. But for the most part, things are somewhat similar, or they're old, kind of dated rules that don't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching here today. Our next one we'll do is going to be the lore of Nurgle. Then we'll follow up with the lore of Slaanesh after that. I'll bamf these out real quick for you dudes. It should take me like 2-3 days to do these, and we'll have one a day for maybe the next 2 or 3 days. Maybe space it out a little bit. I've got a lot of really cool stuff planned for the holiday season. I've got a great video planned for Christmas Eve and a great video planned for Christmas Day actual. So be on the lookout for those. We'll have more of our Legacy of Habahorash as well to kind of play you through the rest of the holiday season as well here, guys. But have a good one. Thanks so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that action. Check out my Patreon, blah, 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 blah. But have a good one, guys, and take care.